What are the latest fantasy football news and notes from around the NFC you need to know? It's time to break it down from all 16 teams here as we begin another edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
Are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for SportingNews.com. It is the quiet time in the NFL offseason. The NFL schedule is out. The draft is in the rearview mirror. We're waiting for OTAs and minicamps. Rookie minicamps just wrapped up here last weekend. So a lot of things to talk about here ahead of all that stuff. Advanced scouting mode in the offseason for you on Locked On Fantasy Football. So we'll break down the latest NFC news and notes you need to know from all 16 teams there as it relates to fantasy football. So we'll break the key things that you need to know, stash away as we do the scouting toward our fantasy football redraft leagues and dynasty and all that good stuff that will come around here in August and September. We got to look at where we are in May, June, and July to set the table now that we have the offseason in the book. So a lot of good stuff to break down from the NFC teams. We'll start with the Arizona Cardinals, going in alphabetical order, all the way through the Washington Commanders. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe and follow us. Also on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, so thanks for checking us out. Every day we do a show here. We really appreciate it. And if you're new to the podcast, welcome, and we'll give you all the insight you need to dominate fantasy football any way you play it. All right, let's dive right in. The Arizona Cardinals, looks like DeAndre Hopkins is going to be in the mix here for the Cardinals. He's not going anywhere. So, look, the contract is hard to move. He's a little bit older. They need a key target there for Kyler Murray when he returns from the injury. I think Marquise Brown, big play threat. Rondale Moore, a little bit of a scat back, open space type receiver here. So you need that number one. There's a good chemistry between Murray and Hopkins. They want that to be extended a little bit more. So Hopkins still can give them a lot. It's the injuries, the wear, the suspension. He just hasn't been the same type of player of late. But I think that's what makes him hard to move, but that also makes him very valuable to the Cardinals, again, because he's a little bit of everything that he's going to give them as a route runner. So that's definitely going to curb the value of Brown and Moore as long as Hopkins is there. So it looked like he was being on the moves. I think he still could go if a team has a key wide receiver injury, especially a veteran contender. But for now, he's the oldest guy that you trust on a young rebuilding roster that may not be a very good team, but you know the passing volume is going to be there. If there's a defense in transition, Hopkins should see his regular dose of heavy targets, and we know when he sees targets, it doesn't matter who the quarterback is. If he's healthy, he's going to put up those numbers. So I wouldn't go crazy and make him a wide receiver 1 staying in Arizona, but wide receiver 2 in the top 24, top 25, that type of scoring I think you could get from Hopkins, assuming that you get a decent quarterback situation with Murray playing most of the games in Arizona. The other thing that happened is Paris Johnson Jr. It doesn't look like necessarily he'll start over DJ Humphries or Kelvin Beachum right away, but they're stashing him. It was a Kyler Murray demanded pick here that they get some pass protection for the future. So Beachum getting a little bit older, Humphries as well. So needed to upgrade there and push the youth along there. So Paris Johnson was a good pick. In terms of fantasy, though, he's got limited impact there for Murray in the running game featuring James Conner. All right, we go from Arizona down to the dirty South and Atlanta with the NFC South running game of the Falcons really being revved up here with Bijan Robinson. He looked very good early. They're definitely ready for him to get a full workload here, so that's not good news for Tyler Algier or Cordell Patterson. Patterson pretty much phased out, but Algier, we thought, okay, maybe we'll get a few power touches behind him, but that's not materializing here at all for the other back. So Bijan Robinson, clearly the lead here. They're going to put it on him. He's a top 10 pick. That's what you're going to do, feature him. So he's going to get the Derrick Henry treatment. And he's living up so far to the justification of him being a top half RB1 here. So in the first 5 or 6 RBs that you'll see off the board in fantasy football in any format, Bijan Robinson is the man. Staying in the NFC South, we go to the Carolina Panthers. Now, they're saying Andy Dalton is the default starter, but at the same time, Bryce Young came in, took over, took command of the offense right away for Frank Reich and Thomas Brown, and they were impressed for sure. He had full control. He looked like a leader that had been there for a long time. He handles himself well in the press conference. So I would be shocked if the Panthers go in the season with Andy Dalton as the starting quarterback. It would be just out of nowhere. This is a typical line. The veteran's been here for a while, even though it's a new offense to him too. He wasn't here last year. I don't want the Panthers to make the same mistake and bring along Young slowly. Put him in the fire. He's good enough. He's a bigger talent overall than Dalton right now. We saw the Bears played out. They were Andy Dalton and didn't want to play Justin Fields early. Play the kid, see what you have early, and get that upside with the running and get that extra dimension. And I don't think the drop-off is much really from Dalton to Young in terms of knowing what to do offensively. I think Dalton is definitely a journeyman quarterback now after his other career as the Bengals' longtime starter. But now Bryce Young definitely looking the part early in terms of what he needs to do to regain the starting job. The other news is that Miles Sanders didn't do much pass catching for the Eagles. They didn't need him to. They had other guys to do that in their offense. And really looking like the Panthers might expand that role again. He has the capacity to do it. We know that. Look at the other backs. Chuba Hubbard is the main guy, and Chuba Hubbard's a pretty good receiver, but Sanders has that potential. Now, that's going to really raise Sanders' profile as he replaces Donta Foreman, who replaced Christian McCaffrey. I'm not saying you're going to get McCaffrey light out of him, but that's good news. In half-point and full-point PPR, that Sanders is going to add that on top of getting feature-like early down touches and the red zone looks here. So really good for Miles Sanders. So they're comfortable with him, giving him a workhorse role. I'm not saying it's going to explode, but 20 touches could be within reach every game here for Sanders, which is great there for Frank Reich. And I'm not, again, Jonathan Taylor, but he definitely is the clear lead back of this offense. And Hubbard, there might be a little bit more separation than we saw with Foreman and Hubbard being quite equal situationally last year in a different offense in 2022. All right, we go back out of the South to the North, and where Andy Dalton used to play. That's Chicago. Justin Fields looking great so far in the offseason. He's seemed sharper, more confident. Why wouldn't you feel more confident? You're a great running quarterback who's now got DJ Moore in the mix. They've had a pretty good chemistry early here as they work on the side and get ready here. So love that they have a legitimate number one in DJ Moore. Makes the other receivers, Darnell Mooney and Chase Claypool and Cole Kmet, and now Robert Tonyan, also a tight end, makes them a little bit more dangerous. So the Bears are looking really good with Justin Fields again. I think he's going to have a big season. In reality, I think he's already emerged in fantasy, obviously, with the running, but watch out for Justin Fields adding that real passing dimension to pad his stats this season. And we're glad he's on track with what he's learned with DJ Moore so far. All right, the Bears' backfield, however, Justin Fields cuts in a lot of that with his rushing production, but now we're worried about the full-blown committee. They don't see any of their backs between Donta Foreman, the former Panther who's there in the mix, Khalil Herbert, who was there before as David Montgomery's complimentary back, and Roschon Johnson, the power back out of Texas. They took Bijan Robinson's old teammate. They don't see any of those guys as a feature back. That's not great because you could have a real split three-man backfield that receiving is going to be key here because Justin Fields is going to cut quite into the rushing. So this is maybe a backfield we want to avoid until we have a little bit of clarity. Maybe an injury or something pops up. Their Herbert hasn't been the most durable, either as Foreman. So really needs Roschon Johnson to see more of a role beyond the power to really trust a Bears running back in fantasy. All right, the final team we'll break down in this segment is Dallas Cowboys. They're always our fifth team when we do this exercise, going alphabetical order, but just happens to be that our final team of the segment. Cowboys looking for CeeDee Lamb new contract. They're working up that. Now, in the receiving core, a little bit of an opening for the number 4 behind CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup and the newcomer Brandon Cooks. There's not going to be a lot of targets to go around, but Jalen Brooks, the rookie, has impressed so far in minicamp to say it's wide open. There's just Jalen Tolbert, who disappointed last year after a good camp, didn't really step up to be the receiver. They moved on from James Washington. So really, Jalen Brooks has a good opportunity. You can do a little bit of everything here as a receiver, good body, strong, runs good routes. So watch out for Jalen Brooks for sure, carving out at least the number 4 role on this team. Deuce Vaughn, they're excited about him, but he's still more of a gadget, spark-type offensive player, and maybe in special teams as well behind Tony Pollard and Malik Davis and running back. Then you have Luke Schoonmaker at tight end. Don't expect Schoonmaker to really fill in where Dalton Schultz was. You do have two other tight ends, Jake Ferguson and Peyton Hendershot. So again, Schoonmaker's pretty much been touted as a key blocker. So don't get too excited about these Cowboys rookies, but between Brooks, Vaughn, and Schoonmaker, trying to just round out and complement some of the things that they already have in this offense. But the big thing is CeeDee Lamb, let's get that deal done and build on as a big season there as the clear-cut dominant number one for Dak Prescott and Dallas and the new offense of Brian Schottenheimer. All right, there's 5 teams we're looking at from the NFC, the latest news and notes there. We still have 11 more teams to get to. We'll do that in our next 2 segments here on this edition of Locked On Fantasy Football. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook official betting partner of the NFL. It's also time for the NBA playoffs. What an exciting time. You got Lakers, Nuggets. You got Celtics, Heat. This is your conference championship series in the West and the East. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs because right now new customers can get a no-sweat first bet. That's right. You can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. They're really good deal. Check it out on screen there. You just go to FanDuel.com/locked-on. It's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Really, they have outstanding bets you can look for. And if you're having trouble making a bet, they have great promotions there to get you into the games and action. And you can even look at the parlays that make a lot of sense with players and games. That's a lot of fun when you go for, say, Nikola Jokic points and the Nuggets winning a game. It's a lot of excitement there that you can put those together when they both pay off for you. So check out the great promotions, the parlays that are available. You can trust that anything you play with FanDuel Sportsbook is going to be safe and secure. And you can get paid instantly. When you win, you don't have to wait for your money. That's the best part. There's no better place to bet on all the playoff action, whether it's NBA, NHL, NFL when it comes back around, than America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel. All you have to do is go to FanDuel.com/lockdown. Check it out on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. And you'll get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockdown. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, it is time to continue the show here on Locked On Fantasy Football. Again, thanks again for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Every day, tomorrow we'll have more breakdown of the NFL offseason for you there and look at the different things that you need to follow, storylines. We're going to get you ready for your drafts, advanced scouting, so check it out there. Really pleased that you're checking it out every day, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on another platform. We really appreciate you checking us out. And if you're new to the show, welcome, and we're going to keep bringing you the great insight. Let's dive right back in. Speaking of which, the Detroit Lions are next, and we have a good news for Jahmyr Gibbs. He tweaked his ankle a little bit in the minicamp. He's going to be out for a little bit, but looks like he avoided any serious time injury, so he should be okay for the OTA's minicamp. So good news for Jahmyr Gibbs, potential feature back. We know with the Lions with no more DeAndre Swift, and they moved on from Jamal Williams, so Gibbs pretty much is going to operate hopefully as a lead, with David Montgomery being his straight-up backup here in Detroit. Sam Laporta is very impressive so far. So we told you about the rookie minicamp. So he's the other rookie that's key here. There's an opening at tight end with Brock Wright. Not much there after they traded TJ Hawkinson, the other Iowa big-time product that they took in the first round. Moved on, traded him into the division rival Vikings. So Laporta from the same program, replacing him, looked pretty good overall. I think the Lions may have had a steal here. Fills a key offensive void that they were missing without Hawkinson, a tight end that they could trust to go with Jared Goff. So Laporta looking good out of the gate early. Something to watch there as a fantasy football tight end sleeper. We go from Detroit to another NFC North team, Green Bay. So Jordan Love has got a contract. He's now signed through 2024, so he doesn't have to worry about that. So he's in a bit of a prove-it mode. He's secure, but he can still do more. There's a real talk about Romeo Doubs taking over as #1 receiver, Christian Watson maybe being the touchdown guy, playing off it. But Doubs, in terms of volume, receptions, and receiving yardage, might be the guy here. So watch out for Doubs and Watson making quite a duo here for Jordan Love. So there's good established chemistry. Love is a young quarterback. These guys in their second year as wide receivers. So I know they had a lot of wide receivers there, but the guys that they got in last year's draft should have key roles here, Doubs and Watson. And then don't forget about Luke Musgrave. There's buzz already about him as a rookie tight end to really have an impact on this team. So and they loaded up on tight ends and receivers in the draft, lost Robert Tonyan. Mercedes Lewis needed to be replaced as well, but Musgrave is an athletic target here. So really that opening is there for that third key target behind those two receivers that I think Dubs and Watson are going to be the main guys. But watch out for Musgrave carving out a real role here as a third target sooner rather than later. We go from Green Bay to the Rams, and Rams are very impressed with Zach Evans, their rookie out of Ole Miss. He had a little bit of receiving juice to him, but they also like his power running. Good blend of skills here for Zach Evans. And they have Cam Akers, and he's going to have a lead back role early, but really are void behind him. Kyron Williams has been a bit disappointing. They've hyped him up a little bit as a key back, but Zach Evans actually might have more talent in key roles. So something to watch out for. Evans climbing the depth chart behind Cam Akers very quickly. Don't forget about Van Jefferson at wide receiver. Keep in mind, they moved on from Allen Robinson. Cooper Kupp is a little bit banged up. Van Jefferson has an opportunity here to make a big role and big name for himself here. Consider that Ben Skoranek is their third receiver here. So Jefferson could see a lot of action here, whether it's Matthew Stafford or if they have to go to the backup, that you'll see Jefferson really step up as the number 2 opposite Cooper Kupp here. So we've been waiting for this beyond Robert Woods and Odell Beckham Jr. and then Allen Robinson, but Jefferson getting more of an opportunity to flex his wings a little bit here to get some opportunity to be a key target. So we'll see how that plays out, but Jefferson definitely is pointing in the right direction. It could be a little bit of make or break year for Jefferson. He's really got to step up now as the number 2 away from Cooper Kupp. And if he does that, there's going to be some fantasy football numbers we can look at that we can extract here as a sleeper in 2023. Let's go from the Rams to the Vikings. There's been a lot of rumors about Dalvin Cook. Is he going to get traded? There's a thought that he still could be on the move, but you look at the Dolphins, they moved on with Devin DeChain in the draft. The Bills have his brother, James. Are they interested in upgrading after getting Damian Harris there in free agency from the Patriots? So are there any other landing spots here that you can look for Dalvin Cook? So that's a tough spot. I mean, the Patriots were going to be in the mix maybe, but they got Ramondre Stevenson. So 3/4 of the NFC East might have been in the mix here. So Dalvin, however, running out of suitors, guys that are really going to be interested in picking him up. So it makes a hefty contract. It's going to be hard to move him. I think you're going to need an injury as well, kind of like the DeAndre Hopkins situation. Other teams got to be shorthanded a little bit to go after Dalvin Cook. They did upgrade the backup situation, drafting Dwayne McBride. Alexander Madison has returned. You also have Ty Chandler, who's very impressive as a runner out of North Carolina. So they do have options that they want to move on from Dalvin Cook, but it actually might be a year away there, 2024, that happens. But we'll still watch it. Dalvin Cook still on the block. They just need some takers that are going to be acceptable of doing that. And again, they're going to be few and far between as we get later in the offseason, unless a backfield suddenly loses depth with an injury. We go from Minnesota to New Orleans. Michael Thomas, concerning that he had some stuff to work on his foot here. The foot injury just won't go away for Michael Thomas. So let's hope he's healthy. He had successful cleanup surgery here, but you just don't know what you're going to get from Michael Thomas. So he's a guy I still think we're a little bit buyer beware in fantasy, especially when you have Chris Olave taking over as the number 1. How much you want to force him as a number 2, because there's also some other options that you worry about there. You have Foster Moreau. It looked like Moreau was not going to be in action at all this season. He was battling Hodgkin's lymphoma, so that was a tough thing. There was a talk that he was going to sit out the season for the Raiders. He ends up with his hometown team, the New Orleans Saints, here, as he replaces Adam Troutman, who was traded to the Broncos. So Moreau doesn't have a bad spot here to maybe carve a name for himself, produced when needed behind Darren Waller in Las Vegas. We'll see how his health plays out. It's good news for him that he's just back on the field, being able to contribute. But watch out for him versus Juwan Johnson. I've always liked Moreau. I think he's a good athletic receiver, and he's been a good plug-and-play for Waller at times. So, again, he needs to get healthy first off the field. That's a big issue, but it was surprised at all that he wanted to return to the NFL here as early as 2023 again. So good news for him, and good news potentially for the Saints down the line at tight end. And they're also excited about Kendre Miller, the power running back. This is interesting because they have Jamal Williams they signed in free agency. Alvin Kamara wasn't moved in trade yet. So Miller might throw a little bit of a wrench into things with the way we think his backfield could be split up with the work. So something to watch there with Kendre Miller for sure. And Michael Thomas, the news is not great here so far with the injury, but Foster Moreau, definitely positive diagnosis, and we're excited about that. Good for him and good for the Saints for giving him a shot with his hometown team. All All right, we're going to the Giants and Saquon Barkley. They're talking to Saquon Barkley. Joe Shane, the GM, has brought up they have negotiations, but it's a franchise tag. Really, you had Josh Jacobs. He was okay with the franchise tag. You had Tony Pollard was okay with there, knowing that they can get some good money, and that's a high-level market. But Barkley wants this big contract, and I think, of course, since he came to the league as that early draft pick in the top 5, that he's asked for a little bit more. He had a final healthy season here that we were looking for. He had a big rookie year. It has been a fade since then. So Barkley looking for money that maybe the Giants do not want to invest in running back. Interesting selection of Eric Gray, a pretty good running back at Oklahoma, has receiving skills in the draft. Matt Breida is a decent runner as well. So we'll watch Saquon Barkley and his demands. I just don't think the Giants are going to give in beyond the tag for this year, and they're going to figure it out next year if they want to keep Barkley based on the kind of season he has in this new look offense to help Daniel Jones in year 2. All right, there's a look at 6 more teams. We'll wrap up the show looking at 5 teams from the Eagles through the Commanders, Philadelphia to Washington in our final segment here as we update you on the latest NFC news and notes you need to know for fantasy football. Again, check out all the great team-by-team podcasts. We've brought you news and notes from the AFC and NFC here the past 2 shows. Our shows do a great job. They're going to keep you abreast of the top topics involving each team here in the quiet part of the offseason. The schedule's out. Their draft picks are in. They have a good idea of what their roster is going to be. So all good breakdowns here. So check out the team-by-team. Wherever your favorite team is, we've got you covered here on the Locked On Network. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your first listen every day. And again, check us out here. Good stuff here that you can check out your team, your fantasy team every day. And we really appreciate you every day or keeping up with those teams all offseason long. All right, it is time to close the show and look at 5 more teams and their latest news and notes. The Eagles added some tight end depth behind Dallas Goedert. They add Dan Arnold here, so maybe displacing Jack Stahl as the key backup there for Arnold, or Arnold's role, I should say, behind Goedert. So something to watch out there for sure, the Eagles. But the Eagles expanding their weaponry a little bit for Jalen Hurts under that new contract. Arnold a good flyer to take after the Jaguars thought he was going to have a big role. They gave up a cornerback, C.J. Henderson, for him to get him from the Panthers. Now he bounces around the former Saints. One-time promising receiver, he gets a shot with the Eagles as a potential number 2 tight end there to help Goddard. We go to the 49ers. I don't no idea what you're going to go on with the quarterbacks here. There's people worried about, is Sam Darnold going to need to start? Is Trey Lance the guy? Is Brock Purdy going to be healthy enough? I think you just have to wait and see. I think it's really hard to read Kyle Shanahan on these quarterbacks. He's going to say things he needs to say at particular times. I don't think there's any way that they're going away from Trey Lance just yet. That's not what they want to do, but they got to weigh his health versus that of Brock Purdy versus the readiness of Sam Darnold and a new offense. All kinds of things are going on here. So I would say with the 49ers quarterbacks, we're going to take a wait-and-see methodical approach with this. The 49ers are not going to tip their hand if they don't need to. They're going to gather all their information. I think it's still developing, knowing how Trey Lance can defend the offense coming off his ankle injury in a very shortened season, essentially getting it wiped out his first season as starter. Also weighing what they can get out of Brock Purdy, if that elbow is good enough to even play this season, and then Sam Darnold to what he can do to complement the rest of this offense. So a lot of things to weigh. I think they're going to play it really slow here with these quarterbacks. So stay tuned here, but definitely we know these quarterback decisions are going to have a big impact on the way they go. We might actually be rooting for Brock Purdy for their key weapons there in 2023. All right, let's go to the Seahawks. And Jaxon Smith-Njigba looked pretty good right away. So I think they definitely need to get him on the field consistently with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. So something being carved out there. They have been relying a lot on 2 tight end sets. I think they'll go more 3 receivers this year with Geno Smith. That's more natural for Shane Waldron coming from the Sean McVay tree and that coaching style. So watch out for, again, Jaxon Smith-Njigba staying on the field quite often with Lockett and Metcalf, and they're restructuring Lockett's contract there to make room here. So, again, Lockett, I think, is on near the end. I think Smith-Njigba is probably going to take over as a key target here as Lockett pushes into the other side of 30 here. So love that. Something to watch right away. Let's go to the Buccaneers. And receiver that's not getting maybe enough attention for the way this offseason went is Chris Godwin. I think it's an ideal offseason for him because, again, you lost a big play threat quarterback in Tom Brady. So that's going to hurt Mike Evans' value, right? You go to Baker Mayfield. What does he do? Throw short to intermediate routes in the middle of the field. They also didn't really upgrade. They're taking some shots here. They got David Moore and some other guys in the mix there as a third receiver that would play on the outside opposite Evans, let Godwin go in the slot. They don't have a lot there either. So Godwin could be very busy as a number 2 inside or outside. Really, he's a co-number 1 with Evans. This could be a big year for Godwin because he's very technical, runs great routes. Mayfield, Kyle Trask, and now John Wolford, one of these guys is going to trust him quite a bit here in this battle. So Chris Godwin, again, they're really confident skill set, maybe a bit underused here. And keep in mind, Godwin blew up with Jameis Winston. So he kind of was curbed a little bit by Tom Brady because Brady could throw to Evans in the red zone and stretch the field a little bit better. He also favored Antonio Brown at times and also had Rob Gronkowski. Now that situation is gone. So Chris Godwin is a really hot sleeper that has some wide receiver 2 of the bullet value here from Tampa based on the role that they expect from him in this new offense, very much like Seahawks. And I think Godwin could get the Lockett treatment because it's Dave Canales. He came from Seattle. And we know there's a parallel there between Metcalf and Lockett and Evans and Godwin. So something to watch there for sure. But Godwin should see his role ramp up quite a bit this season. Finally, we get to the Washington Commanders. I think one disappointment for them last year with Ron Rivera was not using Antonio Gibson enough. And they moved on here from their former offensive coordinator, Scott Turner, enter Eric Bieniemy. And this is a great situation for Antonio Gibson to revive his role here in Washington. I know Brian Robinson Jr. is a pretty good power back. Good story last year, but they were caught up too much in the story maybe than playing the better player. Antonio Gibson was that better player. He can catch passes. Remember, Ron Rivera once thought he was a cheaper version of McCaffrey there that could butt into that role. So now you look at Gibson maybe seeing a little bit more pass catching. We know that's a key part in the Eric Bieniemy offense. Former running back himself at the University of Colorado, done wonders for those receiving backs in Kansas City where they're Jerick McKinnon helped Isaiah Pacheco down the stretch last year. We've seen Damian Williams have a nice year, Darrell Williams. So really good situation for receiving back. Gibson is that kind of hybrid here that can produce. So Ron Rivera said he'd like to see Gibson get more touches. I think it lines up well with the Bieniemy style of offense. So watch out for Antonio Gibson. Could be a rebound, a sleeper that we're looking at. So post-hype sleeper. That's Antonio Gibson. Can be the poster boy for that designation this year. Finally, Sam Howell. Are we thinking that they're going to stick with Sam Howell? Well, we think they are. The Commanders are not joking. They're going to stick with Sam Howell. They're going in it all the way. Not going after quarterback. They might be going back to the well. Maybe Drake May out of North Carolina next year early in the draft if this doesn't work out. But I like Sam Howell in this offense. Again, not someone I'm going to put on the fantasy football radar. The weapons are not bad when you look at Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, and Gibson. But we're going to maybe curb everything that we have interest in the Washington offense, given the tough defensive schedule playing in the NFC East and the AFC East this year. So there you have it. There's a breakdown of the NFC news and notes you need to know, latest for fantasy football. Again, we'll break down more offseason storylines for you on the next show. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Every day, a special shout out to you. And again, if you're new to the podcast, welcome and hope you become an every day or two here. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this is Vinnie Iyer. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll check you out with more fantasy football talk on our next show.